She was homesick that morning. That is the only reason she was there, a sore throat. That is what it came down to. If Amy Weidner had gone to school that Tuesday, she would have turned 17 the following month. She would have walked across a graduation stage. She would have watched her daughter grow up. But she stayed home, and someone who had been inside that house before knew the family's schedule well enough to know that on a school day, the house should be empty. He was wrong. And Amy paid for that with everything she had. Gloria Weidner stepped through her front door that morning and found Emily first, 2 years old, standing on the landing of the staircase alone, not crying, not calling out, just standing there the way small children do when they do not yet understand that something is already over. Gloria picked her up, put her in the pack, and play. And then she went upstairs. She reached for the bedroom door handle, and the silence on the other side of that door was the loudest thing she had ever heard. To understand what was waiting behind that door, you first have to understand who Amy Weidner was, because this case is not just about a murder. It is about a name that sat inside a police file for 9 years, a killer who signed the visitor's book at her funeral, and a DNA profile that has never been matched to anyone. This case was called Solved. But the question nobody has answered is whether the man in prison is the only one who should be there. Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit subscribe and tap the bell right now. Every case on this channel takes nearly 2 weeks to build. Not just researching, but sitting with the weight of what actually happened to real people and real families. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me what brought you here today. Now, let us get into it. South Indianapolis, 1989. A working-class neighborhood, quiet streets, the kind of block where everybody knows which cars belong and which ones do not. Gloria Weidner had been raising 4 children completely alone after her divorce. Working full-time, no backup, no safety net. Amy was the second oldest, and without anyone asking her to, she became the backbone of that house. She cooked dinner, she managed the younger kids, she handled the chores. Her brother John Paul was 1 year older. Her sisters Tanya and 12-year-old Cassie leaned on Amy the way you lean on something that is built to hold, not because they had to, because that is just who she was. At school, Amy was an honor student. She played in the band, French club, math club, cheerleader for the wrestling team. Her French teacher, Jody George, said it plainly. The most important thing about Amy was her work ethic. But work ethic is not what made Amy extraordinary. In 1987, when Amy was 14 years old, she got pregnant. And for 5.5 months, she told absolutely nobody. Think about what that means. A 14-year-old girl carrying a pregnancy through every single school day, sitting in class, eating lunch with her friends, coming home to her mother, holding that entire weight completely alone. She wore baggy sweatshirts. Nobody noticed. Not Gloria, not her teachers, not one of her friends. And then one evening, she could not carry it anymore. She went to her mother crying, and through the tears she said the thing she had been most afraid to say. "Mommy, I do not want you to hate me." Gloria told her she could never hate her children, but the anger was real. Because the father was Tony Abercrombie, 17 years old, John Paul's best friend. That betrayal cut deep in every direction. Gloria made the call. Tony was out. Amy was keeping the baby. School was not optional. On October 25th of 1987, Amy gave birth to a daughter. They named her Emily. 6 days later, Amy was back at school. Not weeks, not a month. 6 days after giving birth, she walked back through those doors, caught up on everything she had missed, and kept going. Jody George said it herself. Not many grown women could do that. Here is the detail that tells you everything about who Amy Weidner was. After Emily was born, her grades went up. Not down, up. She made the honor roll. She started talking about attending Indiana University, Purdue. Gloria thought she would become a French teacher someday. She probably would have been a great one. That Halloween, Amy dressed as the Jolly Green Giant. Emily was Sprout. They went to a party together, a young mother and her baby in matching costumes. And by every account, Amy was completely at peace with the life she had chosen. Her teacher, Jody George, had a daughter named Molly, and Amy, this teenager, who was technically still a child herself, would ask Jody questions about parenting. One day, Amy looked at her teacher and said, "You know what you should do? Get Molly a coat this year." A 16-year-old giving her teacher parenting advice. No one in that house knew the next morning would be the last ordinary one they would ever have. November 13th, 1989. Amy woke up with a sore throat. It seemed simple. Before Gloria left for work, she asked, "Do you want me to take Emily to the babysitter?" Amy said no. "Leave her home with me today." By 9:30 that morning, Gloria was calling the house from work. No answer. She called again. Still nothing. Concerned, she asked a neighbor to check. No one came to the door. Gloria got in her car and drove home. When she stepped inside, 2-year-old Emily was standing quietly on the staircase landing, alone, not crying, just waiting in the way small children do when they do not yet understand something life-changing has happened. Gloria picked her up, set her somewhere safe, and went upstairs. She opened the bedroom door and walked into a moment that would divide her life into before and after. What happened to Amy was heartbreaking. Investigators quickly determined she had endured a terrifying struggle and fought hard. The scene showed clear evidence that this was not an accident or a natural event. Someone had entered that home, and that person had left behind crucial evidence, a clear palm print on the wall. That print became one of the most important pieces of the investigation. Officers preserved it carefully, hoping it would someday provide answers. Emily, incredibly, was physically unharmed, but the reality that she had been there, in the house, during such a traumatic event, left haunting questions for everyone who loved her. In the days that followed, investigators worked carefully to understand what happened. Using child-safe methods, they observed Emily's behavior and her simple way of expressing what she had witnessed. Her words and actions, though limited by her age, became an emotional part of the case. As detectives examined the home, signs suggested this may not have been random. Certain items were missing, and details pointed toward someone who may have known the family, their routines, or the layout of the house. Investigators looked closely at people in Amy's life and those connected to the family. Early suspicions fell on several individuals, including family members and acquaintances, but each lead required evidence, verification, and careful scrutiny. One neighbor, Troy Jackson, drew particular attention. Detectives noted unusual behavior and statements that seemed troubling. His knowledge of details not publicly known raised serious questions. For Amy's family, the investigation became a long and painful search for truth, one marked by grief, suspicion, and the hope that the evidence left behind would eventually speak for itself. Nothing. Hair samples compared to evidence from the scene. No match. Polygraph. He passed. Every thread snapped. The investigation went cold. In those first weeks, detectives attended Amy's funeral not to grieve but to observe. They stood in the back. They documented faces. They collected names from the visitor's book. They knew from experience that killers with a personal connection to the victim frequently attend the service. Some cry. Some comfort the family. Some sign the visitor's book. The killer sat among the people whose lives he had destroyed. He signed his name. That name in his own handwriting was now on a list inside a police box, buried among hundreds of other names, and nobody pulled it out. The months passed. No arrest. Gloria stopped letting her children come home alone. Not once. Cassie was 12 years old. She called her father and asked him to nail the window shut, a child so terrified of an invisible killer that she wanted the house sealed. And Gloria, standing in a grocery store or driving through her own neighborhood, would look at strangers and wonder. The killer was not some shadow from another city. He was local. He knew this family. She could be standing next to him right now. The palm print sat on a shelf. The DNA sat in a bag. And the man who left both of them behind was sleeping just fine. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment with the words, "Still here." Let us see who is truly following this story, because what is coming next is the part that should not be possible. 13 years went by. Then a stranger called the police and said Amy had been visiting him in his dreams. He had lived directly across the street from the Weidners. He had had feelings for Amy, and on the morning of November 13th, 1989, he had been sent home from school early due to a behavioral incident. No alibi, personal connection. 13 years later, and the dreams still would not leave him alone. Lieutenant Roger Spurgeon had taken over the cold case unit in 2002, inheriting approximately 800 unsolved cases, 800 families, 800 sets of unanswered questions. Amy Weidner was one of them. Spurgeon believed that sometimes guilt does not present as guilt. Sometimes it disguises itself as something else. But the DNA ended it. Tested against the sample preserved from Amy's bedding. No match. Dead end again. Then in 2003, something happened that nobody would recognize as significant for 9 more years. Spurgeon's team interviewed Tony Abercrombie as part of the reinvestigation. He gave them a list of people he remembered spending time at the Weidner house. One name on that list was Rodney Denk, friend of John Paul's, regular presence at the house, someone who knew the layout, knew the people, knew the schedules. The name went into the file. Spurgeon would say later that Denk was one of literally dozens and dozens of names, and he may simply not have had the opportunity to look at him. He was one person with 800 cases, but strip away all the context. In 2003, 9 years before this case was solved, the killer's name was written in black and white inside a police file, available to anyone who opened that folder and read far enough. Nobody did. The file went back in the box. In 2011, a reporter at the Indianapolis Star wrote a piece on the city's unsolved murders. Amy Weidner's name appeared in it. A friend of Amy's read the article and built a Facebook page in her memory. Photos, messages, a small digital memorial for a girl the world had mostly forgotten. The cold case detective assigned to Amy's file wanted to examine it but did not know how to print from Facebook. So he walked across the hall. Detective Sergeant William Carter had been with the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's Nuisance Abatement Unit for 14 years. His daily work was quality of life violations, overcrowded clubs, underage drinking at house parties. He was the office's unofficial tech person. He was not a homicide detective. He had never worked a murder case. He had zero official connection to Amy Weidner. His job that afternoon was to print a Facebook page. That was it. He printed it. Then he looked at the photo at the top. Amy Weidner, 16 years old, holding Emily, smiling like someone who had just figured out exactly what her life was supposed to look like. Carter had grown up near that neighborhood. Amy would have been his age, and something about that photo would not let him look away. He picked up the 65-page case file. Nobody asked him to. No supervisor assigned it. He just picked it up and started reading. Typewritten pages from 1989, evidence logs, suspect interviews, the 2003 statement from Tony Abercrombie, the list of names. He read all 65 pages, And somewhere in that file, in a list of names from a 2003 interview, he found a name nobody had ever followed up on: Rodney Denk. Carter did not wait for permission. He took the file home that night and started from the very beginning. His first move exposed the first problem immediately. The 1989 investigation was all paper, typewritten pages, handwritten notes, nothing searchable, nothing cross-referenced. Carter entered everything into a database. Every name, every address, every neighbor who had been canvassed in that original November. As the list grew, something became clear that should have been caught years earlier. Dozens of John Paul's friends had never been interviewed, never given DNA, never cleared, not because they were suspects, simply because nobody had gotten to them. 22 years of files and the basic work of talking to everyone was not finished. Carter started making calls. One of those calls went to a woman named Joy Haney, who had lived directly across the street from the Weidners in 1989. She had known Amy, known John Paul, known who came and went from that house. She had moved years ago, but Carter tracked her down. When she opened the door and found a police officer standing there 22 years after the murder, her face said everything. Carter asked her to walk him through everyone she remembered at the Weidner house. She gave him names, most already in the file. Then she mentioned one more, Rodney Denk. Not as a suspect, just talk to him. He used to come around. He was one of John Paul's friends. Carter wrote the name down, because that name was already in the file, sitting in Abercrombie's 2003 statement for 9 years, mentioned once, never followed up on, never cleared. 2 separate sources, same name, never contacted. Carter ran Denk through the system, 40 years old, divorced, 1 son, currently living with his mother on the east side of Indianapolis, working at a local auto shop, no outstanding warrants, no current investigations, a completely ordinary, unremarkable existence. Carter drove to the house. Denk was not home. His mother answered. Carter left his card and asked that Rodney call him. Just routine questions about an old case. Denk called the same day, calm, cooperative, said sure he would sit down and talk. They set a time. They set a date. Carter arrived for the appointment. Rodney Denk was gone. Not just not home. Gone. His mother had not seen him in days and was thinking about filing a missing persons report. His girlfriend at the time actually did file one. Denk had quit his job, cleared out his bank account, and walked away from everything without telling anyone where he was going. A man who agreed to talk to police had vanished. Carter ran Denk's full arrest history, a battery charge from 1991, a larceny charge from 1997. Both arrests had produced prints. Both were in the system. Carter pulled the 1997 print and walked it down to the latent prints department. His stated goal to colleagues was simply to eliminate Denk and move on. Routine elimination. One more name crossed off the list. He left the print with forensics and went back to his desk. Later that same day, forensics called back. The palm print from Amy Weidner's bedroom wall, the one cut from the drywall in 1989 and preserved for 22 years, matched Rodney Denk's 1997 arrest print. Exact match. No ambiguity. Carter would say later, I was kind of shocked. I really did not expect it to be that easy. That word, easy. 22 years. Multiple detectives, a cold case unit. The answer sitting in a 2003 interview for 9 years. And it took one man working on his own time 12 days to find what everyone else had walked past. The fugitive task force was activated. Denk had used his credit card to rent a car equipped with OnStar, a GPS signal actively transmitting. They had him on the grid before he knew anyone was looking. The signal placed him on the east side of Indianapolis at a friend's house. He had not even left the city. Before the task force moved, Carter called Gloria. He told her they had identified a suspect, someone connected to the family. He did not give a name. Gloria's reaction was not relief. It was fear. She asked one question: "Is it someone we know?" The silence was its own answer. When officers located Rodney Denk, he was stepping out of a friend's house, 40 years old. Ordinary looking, the kind of man you would pass in a parking lot without a second thought. He saw the officers, and he screamed, "I didn't do it." Not confusion, not questions. The moment he saw law enforcement, the first words out of his mouth were a denial, which means part of him had been waiting for this moment for 22 years. He then produced a knife and cut his own wrists. Some reports indicate he may have also slightly cut his throat. Officers subdued him and he was taken to Wishart Hospital, handcuffed to a hospital bed. And that is where the interrogation began. Over the next 48 hours, detectives questioned Rodney Denk on video. What emerged was not a clean confession. It was something more revealing, a man trying even now to control the story. He admitted he had been watching the Weidner house for weeks before November 13th. He had seen the cash Amy was collecting for band uniforms. He knew about the equalizer in John Paul's room. He chose a Monday morning deliberately. School day. Gloria at work. House should be empty. He went to school first that morning, checked in for attendance, then slipped out between classes and walked to the house. He entered through the unlocked back door. He was in John Paul's room taking the equipment when Amy came around the corner. In his own words on camera, "I didn't know she was in there. I was in John Paul's room taking the radio, and she came around the corner and I hit her in the head."
Then he started adding someone else to the story. There was another person, he said, someone named Bucky, or Buck. Maybe it was not Buck. Maybe it was the other guy. He could not quite remember. Detectives let him talk. The story kept shifting. The accomplice kept changing. The details kept moving. And then after hours of this, Rodney Denk stopped and looked across the table and said, "Can I just say it was me? I did everything. Not a dramatic breakdown, not tears. Just a man who had been lying for so long that he was tired of the effort, finally asking permission to tell the truth." But here is where this case becomes something different. Here is the part that the headlines never stayed with long enough to explain, and this is the latest finding that the public needs to understand. When investigators announced Denk's arrest in 2012, the prosecutor at the press conference said something that got very little attention. "There are continuing aspects of this investigation." That phrase was not filler, because in addition to the palm print, police had also recovered semen from the crime scene in 1989, and according to investigators, that semen does not match Rodney Denk. Read that again. The semen recovered from Amy's bedroom does not match the man serving 65 years for her murder. Denk's own DNA did match semen found on her sheets and blanket. But there was additional biological evidence recovered from the scene that points to someone else. Someone who has never been arrested, someone who has never been named publicly, someone who, according to the prosecutor in 2012, is still at large. Throughout his interrogation, Denk never named that person. He introduced the idea of a Bucky or a Buck, and then walked it back. Investigators who have analyzed his behavior believe he may have been protecting someone, not out of loyalty necessarily, possibly out of fear. The question of whether Rodney Denk acted entirely alone has never been officially closed, and as of today there is no named second suspect, no public arrest, no answer. The family was told Denk's name. John Paul Weidner stood in silence trying to process what he was hearing. And then he said the thing that cut through everything else. He was at the funeral with us. How can you commit this brutal murder and then 2 days later sit with us and mourn? Because Rodney Denk had done exactly that. He killed Amy on a Tuesday. He stood in that funeral home surrounded by the people whose lives he had destroyed. He played the role of grieving friend. He signed the visitor's book. His name in his own handwriting had been on a police list for 22 years, and his name added separately in a 2003 interview had been in the file for 9. He had never once been contacted. While investigators were building the case, they discovered something about Rodney's son Dylan that stopped everyone cold. In 2009, 3 years before Rodney's arrest, his teenage son Dylan had been convicted of killing his own mother, Rodney's ex-wife, Mary McHenry. Dylan received a 20-year sentence. During Dylan's case, a social worker recommended releasing him into his father's custody. The judge ruled against it, a routine procedural decision made without any knowledge of Rodney's secret. And it accidentally protected Dylan from being placed in the care of a man living with a 22-year-old murderer. Sometimes the system fails for decades, and then without knowing why it gets one thing right. June 14, 2013, Marion County Courthouse, 23 years, 7 months, and 1 day after Amy Weidner was killed in her bedroom. Rodney Denk pleaded guilty to murder and rape, 50 years for the murder, 15 years for the rape, served consecutively, 65 years total. He will not be eligible for release until he is 73 years old. Gloria had prepared herself to feel rage when she saw him. She had spent weeks bracing for the anger she assumed would come, but when they brought Rodney Denk into that courtroom, she felt something she had not expected. She said it outside the courthouse quietly and clearly. "I thought I was going to see a monster, but who I saw was Rodney." For 23 years, 7 months, and 1 day, they believed a stranger had come into their home. That is the truth this case keeps returning to. The most dangerous person in Amy's life was not a stranger. He was familiar. He was trusted. He was the kind of person you let into your house without thinking twice. Emily Weidner graduated from Purdue University with honors, her mother's work ethic alive in her and carrying forward. She moved to California the year after graduation. She said she could not be who she was supposed to be in Indiana. The weight of that place and that history had shaped her in ways she was still trying to understand.
At her graduation, Jody George, who had taught both Amy and Emily, pulled her aside and said, "I know your mother would be so proud of you right now." Back in Indianapolis, Gloria eventually changed Amy's old bedroom. The room where Amy died is now where the grandchildren sleep when they visit. One thing remains from Amy's time: a hat on the door. Everything else has been replaced. Gloria said it simply: Amy is not in that room anymore. Amy is in me. And Bill Carter, the nuisance abatement officer, who was only supposed to print a Facebook page, maintains Amy Weidner's Find a Grave memorial to this day. He created it. He updates it. A man who had no official reason to care about this case decided to care about it anyway. He was later offered a promotion to detective. He turned it down. And because of that single decision to pick up a file, nobody assigned him. A family got the answer they had been waiting 22 years to hear. But the answer is not complete. There is still a DNA profile sitting in an evidence system somewhere in Indianapolis that does not match the man in prison. There is still a name that has never been spoken publicly, and there is still a person who was in or connected to that house on the morning of November 13th, 1989, who has never answered for what happened to Amy Weidner. A 2-year-old girl lost her mother that morning. She carried it every single day without knowing the full shape of what she was carrying. And somewhere in a prison in Indiana, the man who has given a name to that morning is counting years while the people he hurt are still learning how to live. But the question that nobody has answered, the one that sits at the center of this entire case, is that the only man who should be counting? If this case moved you the way I think it did, then do this right now. Hit subscribe so you never miss a case that deserves more than a cold shelf. Like this video so the algorithm keeps pushing Amy's name into places where people will learn it. And drop a comment below with the question you cannot stop thinking about. Do you believe Rodney Denk acted alone that morning? Or does the unmatched DNA tell a story that the plea deal quietly closed the door on? Because sometimes justice is partial, and partial is not the same as finished. Amy Weidner deserved finished. Her family still does.